The cold, dark expanse of space stretched endlessly, a silent canvas punctuated by distant stars. Captain J. Park stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Promise, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that flickered with an unusual energy signature. Something was different about this particular reading. The ship's sensors hummed softly, cutting through the silence of deep space exploration. Hai Kim, the ship's lead navigator, leaned forward, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "Captain," she called, her voice tight with curiosity, "we're detecting an unusual transmission." Jay approached the console, his military training keeping his movements precise and controlled. The signal was unlike anything they had encountered before, fragmented, desperate, and carrying an underlying tone of pure terror. As the transmission cleared, a holographic image materialized. A creature unlike any human had ever seen before appeared, translucent skin that seemed to shimmer with an internal light, large almond-shaped eyes that reflected a deep, profound sorrow. This was Coral, a representative of the Zorn civilization. The Zorn's planet Aloran hung in the background of the transmission, a beautiful world slowly being consumed by an endless nightmare. Massive warships of the Krell Collective circled the planet like vultures, their weapon systems constantly charging and discharging. Coral's message was simple and heartbreaking. "We are dying," the alien communicated, each word laden with generations of fear. "The Krell have hunted us for centuries. Our civilization is moments away from complete extinction." J. Park studied the transmission carefully. Years of military training had taught him to read between the lines, to understand the unspoken desperation behind such a message. The Zorn were not just asking for help, they were begging for survival. The ship's communication systems began, analyzing the transmission. Advanced AI systems worked rapidly, translating not just the words, but the cultural nuances, the deep emotional context behind the Zorn's plea. Shuai Kim pulled up additional data streams. The Zorn's technological records showed a civilization of incredible scientific achievement, yet with absolutely no military capability. They were scholars, researchers, creators, but not warriors. Their entire species had evolved without the concept of defensive warfare. The Krell Collective, by contrast, was a nightmare of technological brutality. They moved from planet to planet, consuming civilizations, harvesting resources, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. To them, the Zorn were nothing more than a resource to be stripped and discarded. Captain Park's fingers touched the communication controls. A decision hung in the balance, a decision that could change everything. Humanity had always been at a crossroads in deep space exploration. They could observe, they could ignore, or they could intervene. Each choice carried massive consequences. The bridge crew waited in silence. Every team member understood the weight of this moment. This wasn't just about saving an alien civilization. This was about defining humanity's role in the universe. Coral's image continued to flicker, a silent testament to his species' imminent destruction. The transmission showed glimpses of Zorn cities, beautiful architectural marvels, complex scientific facilities, libraries of incredible knowledge, all on the brink of complete annihilation. Hai Kim's voice broke the silence. "They're losing communication capabilities," she reported. "The Krell are systematically destroying their communication infrastructure." Jay knew they had minutes, perhaps less, to make a decision that would determine the fate of an entire civilization. His hand hovered over the communication controls. One command could send a response. One command could offer hope. One command could change everything. The universe seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, Captain J. Park made a choice that would be remembered throughout galactic history. A choice that went beyond military strategy. A choice that defined the very essence of human potential. He would protect the Zorn, not because it was strategically advantageous, not because there was something to be gained, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The communication channel opened. A message of hope began to transmit across the vast, cold darkness of space. The transformation began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Within weeks of first contact, human technicians and military experts descended upon the Zorn's primary research facilities. What had once been a purely academic world now buzzed with a new energy, the energy of survival. Coral watched in amazement as human specialists moved through their complex. They didn't just bring weapons or defensive systems, they brought something far more powerful: knowledge and strategy. Kim stood at the center of the training ground, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the group of Zorn recruits. These were scientists, researchers, people who had never held a weapon in their lives. Now they would learn to defend themselves. Observation is your first weapon, she explained, demonstrating a complex defensive maneuver. The Zorn watched, their translucent skin shifting with curiosity and fear. Admiral Wu Li arrived with the first wave of technological upgrades. Massive containers filled with advanced human defense systems were carefully unloaded. Each piece of equipment represented years of human military research, technologies developed through countless conflicts and technological breakthroughs. The Zorn's original ship designs were elegant but fragile. Human engineers began a complete redesign. Energy shields replaced thin hull plating. Complex adaptive algorithms replaced simple navigation systems. What was once a research vessel became a potential weapon of defense. Coral watched as his people transformed. Scientists who once spent years studying molecular structures now learned combat strategies. Researchers who had dedicated their lives to peaceful exploration now understood the harsh realities of survival. We are not becoming warriors, Kim explained during one training session. We are learning to protect what we love. The training was brutal but methodical. The Zorn learned to read battle scenarios, to understand strategic positioning, to think like defenders rather than victims. Human instructors broke down complex military concepts into simple, understandable principles. Every day brought new challenges. Some Zorn struggled with the concept of defensive warfare. Others embraced it with surprising enthusiasm. Their natural scientific approach made them quick learners, able to adapt and understand complex tactical concepts rapidly. Admiral Li watched the transformation with a critical eye. He had seen many military training programs, but this was different. This wasn't about creating soldiers. This was about giving a peaceful civilization the tools to survive. Communication systems were the first major upgrade. The Zorn's original communication network was advanced, but vulnerable. Human engineers introduced encryption methods, defensive communication protocols, and backup systems that could survive even the most aggressive attack. Weapons training began with simple simulations. Virtual battle scenarios allowed the Zorn to understand combat without the immediate psychological trauma of real conflict. They learned to move as units, to think collectively, to understand that survival meant working together. Coral found himself in the middle of these transformations. As a lead diplomat, he was now also learning military strategy. His scientific mind absorbed the concepts quickly, understanding that defense was its own form of complex problem-solving. The human team worked around the clock. Engineers, military strategists, communication experts, all focused on a single goal: transform the Zorn from a potential victim civilization into a defendable society. Weeks turned into months. The changes became more profound. Zorn ships began to look different, sleeker, more adaptive. Their communication systems hummed with new energy. Their research facilities now included defensive strategy rooms alongside their scientific laboratories. We are not losing our identity, Coral would often tell his people. We are expanding it. The human team understood something profound. This wasn't just about teaching military skills. This was about giving a peaceful civilization the confidence to survive. Every lesson was designed not just to create defenders, but to empower a species, to protect itself. Admiral Li watched a training simulation one evening. Zorn recruits moved with newfound confidence, their movements precise, their strategies calculated. They were no longer just scientists. They were becoming guardians of their own civilization. As the first phase of preparation concluded, something remarkable had happened. The Zorn were no longer waiting to be saved. They were preparing to fight back. The universe was about to learn a critical lesson. Sometimes the most peaceful civilizations make the most determined defenders. The silence of space shattered without warning. Massive Krell warships erupted from hyperspace, their angular metal structures blocking Aloran's star system like predatory sharks surrounding vulnerable prey. But this time, the prey was ready. Captain J. Park stood on the bridge of the command vessel, his hands steady, his eyes calculating. The Zorn ships, once fragile research vessels, now gleamed with human-designed defensive technologies. Each ship moved with a precision that would have been impossible months earlier. Corral's voice came through the communication channel, different from their first encounter. No longer trembling with fear, he spoke with calculated determination. "Defensive formation Alpha 7, he commanded, his voice steady and clear. The first wave of Krell attack ships approached, expecting the same easy targets they had hunted for generations. Their weapon systems charged, ready to deliver another devastating blow to the Zorn civilization. They were about to be proven dramatically wrong. Zorn pilot squadrons, trained meticulously by human instructors, moved with unexpected grace. Where they once scattered, they now formed tight defensive formations. Each ship worked as part of a larger intelligent network, a living, breathing defensive organism. Shai Kim's strategic algorithms came to life. The Zorn ships didn't just defend, they anticipated. Krell weapon trajectories were predicted milliseconds before firing. Defensive energy shields absorbed impacts that would have previously destroyed entire fleets. Admiral Wu Li watched the battle unfold, a subtle smile crossing his face. Months of training, countless simulations, and precise technological upgrades were now being tested in real combat. The Krell commanders couldn't understand what was happening. Their predictable tactics, overwhelming force, concentrated attacks were being systematically dismantled by a civilization they had previously considered helpless. One Krell battlecruiser attempted a standard attack pattern. Before its weapons could fully charge, 3 Zorn ships had already identified its weak points. Precision energy bursts disabled its primary systems, turning a potential threat into a drifting, powerless hulk. Coral's scientific background became an unexpected weapon. He coordinated defensive strategies with mathematical precision, turning battle into a complex problem to be solved. Each Krell attack was analyzed, understood, and countered within seconds. The human advisors had taught the Zorn one critical lesson. Defense is not just about fighting. It's about understanding your enemy completely. Explosions blossomed across the star system, not of destruction but of strategic combat. Krell ships found themselves outmaneuvered, their advanced weapons neutralized by even more advanced defensive technologies. Captain Park's voice remained calm. "Maintain formation. Protect the civilian vessels," he instructed. The battle wasn't just about winning. It was about preserving life. Hours passed. What the Krell expected to be a simple extermination mission became a complex, humiliating defeat. Their most advanced attack squadrons were being systematically dismantled by a civilization they had hunted for centuries. As the battle reached its critical point, something extraordinary happened. The Zorn weren't just defending themselves. They were sending a message to the entire galaxy. We will no longer be victims. The last Krell battle group retreated, their once mighty fleet reduced to scattered, damaged vessels. They had come expecting complete victory. They were leaving with complete defeat. Corral looked at the battle displays, his translucent skin now showing hints of what could only be described as pride. The scientific civilization had become something more, a defended civilization. Captain J. Park watched the retreating Krell ships. This was more than a military victory. This was a transformation. The communication channels filled with cheers from Zorn ships, not cheers of violence, but cheers of survival. They had protected their home. They had protected each other. As the star system began to calm, one thing became absolutely clear. The galaxy had just witnessed the birth of a new defensive power. The Zorn were no longer prey. They were protectors. News traveled faster than light across the galaxy. The Zorn, once considered the weakest civilization, had not just survived, but defeated the Krell collective. Communication networks buzzed. with the unexpected story of resistance. Admiral Wu Li understood this was more than a single battle. This was the beginning of something much larger. Other threatened civilizations began sending desperate transmissions. Small planetary systems that had lived in constant fear of the Krell now saw a possibility of hope. If the Zorn could transform, perhaps they could too. The first delegation arrived from the Terran system, a small technologically limited civilization living on the edge of explored space. Their representatives looked nervous, their multiple eyes constantly scanning the human Zorn training facilities. "We want to learn," their lead diplomat said simply. Captain J. Park and Corral worked together, developing a comprehensive defensive training program. It wasn't about creating warriors. It was about teaching survival, about giving hope to civilizations that had forgotten what hope felt like. Human military strategists began developing complex defensive networks. Each participating civilization would contribute something unique: the Terrans' advanced sensor technologies, the Zorn's scientific approach, human strategic thinking. A galactic defensive coalition began to take shape. The Krell had always relied on fear. They moved from system to system, consuming resources, destroying civilizations that couldn't defend themselves. No one had ever successfully organized a unified resistance, until now. Chai Kim developed adaptive communication systems that could link different species' technologies. What seemed impossible became a working reality. Ships from different civilizations could now communicate, coordinate, and defend together. Admiral Lee's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. They weren't just creating a defensive network, they were creating a community of protection. Training centers opened on multiple planets. Human instructors worked alongside Zorn specialists, teaching defensive strategies to civilizations that had known only fear for generations. Each training session was more than a military lesson. It was a restoration of hope. The Krell began to realize something was changing. Their traditional hunting grounds were becoming dangerous. Civilizations that once scattered at their approach were now organizing, preparing, resisting. Corral became a symbol of this transformation. A scientist who had become a defender, he traveled between systems, sharing the Zorn's story. His message was powerful. Survival is not just about fighting, it's about working together. One by one, threatened civilizations joined the resistance. Small planetary systems that had lived under constant threat now stood together. Their ships, once vulnerable, now moved with coordinated purpose. Human technology played a crucial role. Advanced defensive systems were shared, adapted, improved. Each civilization brought its unique perspective, creating something stronger than any single species could achieve alone. The galaxy watched in amazement. What had started as a simple protection of the Zorn was becoming a massive, organized resistance movement. Admiral Lee understood the deeper strategy. This wasn't just about defending against the Krell. This was about changing the fundamental approach to survival in the galaxy. Communication networks expanded. Defensive strategies were shared. Technologies were integrated. What seemed impossible just months earlier was now a working reality. The Krell began to understand they were no longer dealing with isolated, vulnerable civilizations. They were facing a united, organized defensive force. Corral often spoke about this transformation. "We were not warriors," he would explain. "We became defenders. There is a difference." The resistance grew stronger with each passing month. More systems joined. More technologies were shared. The fear that had dominated galactic interactions for generations began to dissolve. Captain J. Park looked at the evolving galactic map. What had begun as a mission to protect a single civilization was becoming a movement that would change everything. The Krell had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the power of cooperation, of hope, of the fundamental desire to protect, and now they would face the consequences. Thousands of ships from different civilizations surrounded the Krell's primary command hub. What once seemed impossible was now a unified force of protection and resistance. Captain J. Park stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, his eyes fixed on the massive Krell structure. Years of preparation had led to this moment. The coalition was no longer a collection of separate species. They were a single, coordinated force. Coral stood beside him, no longer the trembling diplomat from their first encounter. His translucent skin now reflected determination, a living symbol of transformation. The Krell commanders couldn't understand what was happening. Their traditional tactics of divide and conquer had been completely neutralized. Each attack route was anticipated, each strategy predicted. Hai Kim's advanced communication systems linked every ship in the coalition. They moved like a single organism, each vessel understanding its precise role in the massive defensive network. Admiral Wu Li's strategy was simple, yet profound. They weren't just attacking. They were systematically dismantling the Krell's ability to wage war. Communication systems went first. Precise energy bursts disabled the Krell's massive communication arrays. Their ability to coordinate attacks vanished in moments. Defensive platforms that had protected the Krell for generations suddenly became useless. Technologies they had developed over centuries were neutralized by the combined scientific expertise of the coalition. The Terran's advanced sensor technologies detected every potential Krell movement milliseconds before it happened. The Zorn's scientific approach provided complex predictive algorithms. Human strategic thinking tied everything together. Explosions bloomed across the Krell command hub. But these weren't random destructions. Each strike was calculated, precise, designed to minimize loss of life. Coral watched the battle with a scientist's precision. "We are not destroying," he explained to nearby crew members. "We are preventing future destruction." Hours passed. The sea. Krell's once mighty defense systems crumbled. They had believed themselves invincible. Now they understood the true meaning of vulnerability. Captain Park's voice remained calm. "Maintain defensive formations. Protect civilian structures." The battle wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping a cycle of destruction. As the final defensive systems fell, something unexpected happened. The Krell leadership realized they had a choice. Continued resistance would mean complete elimination. Surrender became their only viable option. The coalition didn't celebrate with violence. They offered a path forward, rehabilitation, reconstruction, a chance to become part of a larger, cooperative, galactic community. Coral approached the Krell leadership, his movements showing both strength and compassion. "Survival is not about conquest," he explained. "It's about understanding." The Krell command hub went silent. Generations of aggressive expansion had come to an end. Admiral Lee understood this was more than a military victory. This was a fundamental shift in galactic interactions. Communication channels filled with messages of hope. Civilizations that had lived in fear for generations now saw a different future. The Zorn, once on the brink of extinction, had become architects of a new galactic order. Their transformation was complete. Captain J. Park looked out at the star system. What had begun as a simple mission to protect a single civilization had changed everything. Hai Kim's systems continued to monitor. The threat was neutralized, but vigilance would remain. Coral turned to Captain Park, his eyes reflecting a complex mix of emotions. "We did not just save ourselves," he said. "We showed the galaxy a different way of existing." The battle was over. But something much larger had just begun. A new era of galactic cooperation had arrived, and humanity had played a crucial role in making it happen.